Welcome to the Plume and Page. Today's story is The Golden Goose. There was once a man who had 3 sons. The youngest of them was called Simpleton, and he was sneered and jeered at and snubbed on every possible opportunity. One day it happened that the eldest son wished to go into the forest to cut wood, and before he started out his mother gave him a fine, rich cake and a bottle of wine so that he might be sure not to suffer from hunger or thirst. When he reached the forest, he met a little grey old man who wished him good morning, and said, "Do give me a piece of that cake you are carrying, and a drink from your bottle of wine. I am so hungry and thirsty." But this clever son replied, "If I give you my cake and wine, I shall have none for myself. You just go your own way." And he left the little grey man standing there, and went farther on into the forest. There he began to cut down a tree. But before long he made a false stroke with his axe, and cut his own arm so badly that he was obliged to go home and have it bound up by his mother. Then the second son went to the forest, and his mother gave him a good cake and a bottle of wine, as she had to his elder brother. He too met the little grey old man, who begged him for a morsel of cake and a drink of wine. But the second son spoke most sensibly also, and said, "Whatever I give you, I deprive myself of. Just go your own way, will you?" Not long afterward, his punishment overtook him, for no sooner he had struck a couple of blows with his axe than he cut his leg so badly that he had to be carried back home. Then the youngest son said, "Father, let me go out and cut wood." But his father answered, "Both your brothers have injured themselves. You had better not. You know nothing about it." The boy begged him so hard to be allowed to go that at last his father said, "Very well then, go. Perhaps when you have hurt yourself, you may learn to know better." His mother gave him only a very plain cake, made with water and baked in the cinders, and a bottle of sour beer. When he came to the forest, he too met the little grey old man, who greeted him and said, "Give me a piece of your cake and a drink from your bottle. I am so hungry and thirsty." The boy replied, "I have just a cinder cake and some sour beer, but if you care to have that, let us sit down and eat." So they sat down, and when the boy brought out his cake, he found it had turned into a fine rich loaf, and the sour beer into excellent wine. Then they ate and drank all they wanted. When they had finished eating, the little grey man said, "Now, I will bring you luck, because you have a kind heart and are willing to share what you have with others. There stands an old tree. Cut it down, and among its roots you'll find something." With that the little man took his leave. Then the boy began at once to hew down the tree, and when it fell he found among its roots a goose, whose feathers were all of pure gold. He lifted it out, carried it off, and took it with him to an inn, where he meant to spend the night. Now the landlord of the inn had 3 daughters, and when they saw the goose, they were filled with curiosity about this wonderful bird, and each longed to have one of its golden feathers. The eldest said to herself, "No doubt I shall soon find a good opportunity to pluck out one of its feathers." And the first time Simpleton happened to leave the room, she caught hold of the goose by its wing. But, lo and behold, her fingers seemed to stick fast to the goose, and she could not take her hand away. Soon afterward the second daughter came in and thought to pluck a gold feather for herself too, but hardly had she touched her sister than she stuck fast as well. At last the third sister came with the same intention, but the other 2 cried out, "Keep off! For heaven's sakes, keep off!" The youngest sister could not imagine why she was to keep off, and thought, "If they are both there, why should not I be there too?" So she sprang toward them, but no sooner had she touched one of them than she stuck fast to her, and they all 3 had to spend the night with the goose. Next morning the boy tucked the goose under his arm and went off, without in the least troubling himself about the 3 girls who were hanging on to it. They just had to run after him, right or left, as best they could. In the middle of a field they met the parson, and when he saw this procession he cried, "For shame, you bold girls! What do you mean by running after a young fellow through the fields like that?" And with that he caught the youngest girl by the arm to draw her away. But directly he touched her, he stuck on, and had to run along with the rest. Not long afterward the town clerk came that way, and was much surprised to see the parson following the footsteps of the three girls. "Why, where is your reverence going so fast?" cried he. And he ran after him, grabbed his coat, and hung on to it himself. As the five of them trotted along in the fashion one after the other, two peasants were coming from their work with their hoes. On seeing them, the parson called out and begged them to come and rescue him and the clerk. But no sooner did the first one touch the clerk than they were stuck too. And so there were 7 of them running after Simpleton and his goose. After a time they came to a town where a king reigned whose daughter was so serious and solemn that no one could ever manage to make her laugh. So the king had decreed that whoever should succeed in making her laugh could marry her. When Simpleton heard this, he marched before the princess with his goose and its appendages. And as soon as she saw these 7 people continually running after each other, she burst out laughing and could not stop herself. Then he claimed her as his bride, but the king, who did not much fancy him as a son-in-law, made all sorts of objections and told him he must first find a man who could drink up a whole cellar full of wine. Simpleton bethought him of the little grey old man who could, he felt sure, help him. So he went off to the forest, and on the very spot where he had cut down the tree he saw a man with the most dismal expression on his face. He asked the man what he was taking so much to heart, and the man answered, "I don't know how I am ever to quench this terrible thirst I am suffering from. Cold water doesn't suit me at all. To be sure, I've emptied a whole barrel of wine. But what is 1 drop on a hot stone?" "I think I can help you," said the boy. "Come with me, and you shall drink to your heart's content." So he took him to the king's cellar, and the man sat down before the huge casks and drank till he had drunk up the whole contents of the cellar before the day closed. Then Simpleton asked once more for his bride, but the king felt vexed at the idea of a stupid fellow whom people called Simpleton carrying off his daughter, and he began to make fresh conditions. He required Simpleton to find a man who could eat a mountain of bread. The boy did not wait to consider long, but went straight off to the forest, and there on the same spot sat a man who was drawing in a strap as tightly as he could around his body, and making a most woeful face the while. Said he, "I've eaten up a whole ovenful of loaves, but what's the good of that to anyone who is as hungry as I am? I declare my stomach feels quite empty, and I must draw my belt tight, if I'm not to die of starvation." Simpleton was delighted, and said, "Get up, and come with me, and you shall have plenty to eat." And he brought him to the king's court. Now the king had given orders to have all the flour in the kingdom brought together, and to have a huge mountain baked of it. But the man from the wood just took up his stand before the mountain, and began to eat, and in one day it had all vanished. For the 3rd time Simpleton asked for his bride, but again the king tried to make some evasion, and demanded a ship which could sail on land or water. "When you come sailing in such a ship," said he, "you shall have my daughter without further delay." Again the boy started off to the forest, and there he found the little grey old man with whom he had shared his cake, and who said, "I have eaten and I have drunk for you, and now I will give you the ship. I have done all these things for you because you were kind and merciful to me." Then he gave him a ship which could sail on land or water, and when the king saw it, he felt he could no longer refuse him his daughter. So they celebrated the wedding with great rejoicings, and after the king's death Simpleton succeeded to the kingdom, and lived happily with his wife for many years.